per 1,000 acts if the partner has HSV-2.
Right.
But if you are a client seeing escorts who are 35 or older in this demographic in inner-city Baltimore, the probability of encountering an infected partner is no longer a coin toss. It isn't a maybe.
No, it's not.
It is an overwhelming statistical likelihood. More than 8 out of every 10 women you encounter in that specific pool will be carrying the virus.
This perfectly illustrates the reality of community viral load and network saturation. When the prevalence in a specific sexual network or mating pool reaches nearly 83%, the virus has effectively saturated the environment.
That's right.
The mathematical probability of a highly active individual avoiding exposure over a sustained period of time within that specific network drops to near zero. You are no longer navigating a minefield with a few scattered mines.
Yeah.
You are walking through a field where almost every step is a potential exposure.
But here is a psychological defense mechanism I know a lot of people use, especially clients, navigating these risks. A guy might say, look, I know the statistics are high, but I'm smart about this. I always ask the escort before I book an appointment. I explicitly ask, are you clean? Do you ever get cold sores or outbreaks down there?
Right, they try to vet them.
Exactly. And she looks him in the eye and says, I have never had a sore in my entire life. Doesn't that vetting process make her mathematically safer to see?
That logic feels incredibly sound to the human brain, but it represents one of the most dangerous paradoxes in the entire field of sexual health.
Really?
Let's look at what the math actually dictates. A partner who genuinely believes they never get sores, operating within a demographic that has an 82.8% prevalence rate, is statistically highly likely to simply be among the 87.4% who are infected but asymptomatic and unaware.
The silent majority we talked about earlier.
Yes. Now let's contrast her with a different partner. Imagine a woman who says, yes, I have HSV-2 and I typically experience about 4 visible outbreaks a year. Every instinct of human self-preservation tells you to avoid the second woman and see the first woman who claims to be clean. The epidemiological data suggests you might actually be safer with the woman who gets outbreaks.
Okay, wait. You have to walk me through the biological mechanism of that because it sounds completely backwards. Why is the woman with 4 visible active herpes outbreaks a year considered a safer statistical bet?
It comes down to bodily awareness and viral warning systems. A person who experiences regular visible outbreaks learns to recognize their prodrome.
Prodrome. That's the neurological warning sign, right? Like the tingling, the itching, the nerve pain in the legs or the lower back that happens days before a blister actually forms on the skin.
Correct. The prodrome is the biological signal that the virus has left the dorsal root ganglion and is actively traveling down the nerve pathway.
So it's on the move.
Yes, it signals that intense viral shedding is occurring or is about to occur. Now, a professional escort whose livelihood depends on her body, who knows she has HSV-2 and knows her specific prodrome symptoms, will feel that tingling and immediately stop working.
Oh, I see.
She will cancel her appointments. She will avoid sexual contact during her most highly infectious peak shedding windows.
Because she knows a sore is coming, and she knows she is contagious right then.
Exactly. Therefore, her clients are inherently avoiding her during the periods of highest viral load.
Right.
But the woman who never gets sores has no prodrome. Her body offers her zero early warning system. She relies on a total false sense of security, which means she will continue to book clients and provide sexual services right through her periods of subclinical asymptomatic shedding, completely unaware that she is highly contagious.
Wow. So the 87.4% who are unaware aren't just a statistic. They are the primary vectors of the disease.
They absolutely are.
They are the ones unknowingly driving the transmission rate, precisely because their visual inspection of their own body tells them they are safe. Ignorance of the infection is literally the fuel for the epidemic.
It is the ultimate blind spot, and it proves that visual inspection and verbal assurances are mathematically useless in a high-prevalence pool.
Okay, so we've firmly established that age and demographic factors drastically change the odds within this population. Time and demographics matter. But what about geography?
Geography is huge here.
Because the Johns Hopkins study didn't just stop at age and race. They took those 3,408 blood samples and tracked them back to the patient's literal home zip codes in Baltimore. And our focus specifically asked us to contrast seeing someone in inner-city Baltimore versus seeing an escort at BWI, the Baltimore-Washington International Airport.
The spatial analysis portion of this study is arguably its most fascinating contribution. By mapping the seroprevalence to specific zip codes, the researchers didn't just find a flat rate of infection across the city.
What did they find?
They found massive, highly localized microclimates of risk sitting right next to each other.
It's like looking at a highly detailed weather radar. The microclimate of the exact neighborhood you are standing in drastically changes your chance of getting caught in a downpour. I'm looking at the data from Figure 2 in the source material, which is a spatial map of Baltimore City's zip codes. The variance between neighborhoods is wild.
Give us some of those specific data points.
Okay, so in zip code 21217, the seroprevalence hits a staggering 73.9% for the general adult population. But if you move just a few miles away to zip code 21224, the prevalence drops to 45.3%. That is nearly a 30-point swing in viral prevalence within the exact same city limits.
What that variance highlights is how intensely localized human sexual networks actually are. Socioeconomic factors, housing patterns, and community insularity deeply influence health outcomes.
Right, it's not just random.
No, these aren't random distributions of a virus. They represent closed-loop networks where the pathogen circulates internally among a specific geographical population.
But the researchers did something really clever with this geographic data that speaks directly to the BWI airport scenario.
Yeah.
They isolated a specific subgroup of patients, non-Maryland residents.
Ah.
These were people who had an out-of-state home address, but for whatever reason, ended up seeking care in the Johns Hopkins ER while visiting Baltimore.
And scientifically, this non-resident group serves as an excellent proxy for the traveler or touring demographic. In the context of our scenario, this perfectly mirrors escorts who do not live in Baltimore but fly into BWI from other states to work out of airport hotels for a weekend tour.
And the data for these non-Maryland residents is drastically different. For out-of-state patients, the overall prevalence dropped to 32.6%.
Think about that drop.
Seriously, we go from an 82.8% saturation in the older inner-city demographic to a 54% overall city average, down to 32.6% for the people just passing through.
But the researchers needed to know why that drop existed. Was there something magical about living outside of Maryland?
Right, like is the water different?
Exactly. So they ran another multivariate regression to see if the zip code itself was the true risk factor, or if the zip code was just a proxy for the demographics of who lived there.
And what did the regression show?
It showed that the massive 30-point differences between the local Baltimore zip codes were completely attenuated, meaning their statistical significance vanished once the researchers controlled for age and gender.
Let me make sure I'm translating that correctly. That means living in zip code 21217 didn't magically give you a higher risk of herpes just because of the soil or the geography?
Correct.
It just meant that zip code 21217 had a higher demographic concentration of older females who the data already proved have the highest rates. The demographics explained away the geography.
The underlying demographics were the true drivers, yes, but there was one glaring, statistically significant exception to that rule.
Okay.
The lower risk associated with living outside of Maryland, that 32.6% rate, remained statistically significant even after they controlled for age and gender. Oh, wow. So even if you compare a 35-year-old black female from inner-city Baltimore with a 35-year-old black female from out of state, the out-of-state traveler still mathematically represents a lower risk pool. What does this mean for the client making a booking decision?
It means that the local inner-city environment of Baltimore carries a uniquely concentrated, historically compounded risk profile.
Interesting.
If a client is actively deciding between seeing a local inner-city provider or driving to BWI to see an escort who just flew in from out of state, the statistical probability of encountering the virus is measurably significantly lower with the out-of-state traveler.
Because they're from a different pool.
Exactly. The touring provider at BWI is pulling from a broader national prevalence pool, which trends much closer to the 15.7% national average, or that 32.6% hospital traveler average, rather than the 80+% saturation of the closed local network. That is a profound realization. The exact same physical act, with the exact same age demographic, carries a fundamentally different mathematical risk, purely based on the geographic origin of the partner's historical sexual network.
It does.
You aren't just sleeping with a person in a hotel room. You are mathematically interacting with every geographical network they have ever been a part of.
It is the invisible web of epidemiology. Every encounter carries the shadow of 1,000 previous encounters across different zip codes.
Okay, I need to take a breath, because that is an immense amount of data to process.
It's a lot.
We've mapped the baseline tracked risk. We have mapped the staggering demographics of age and race. We've mapped the microclimates of inner-city zip codes versus BWI travelers.
Right.
But up to this point, every single thing we have discussed, the 1.7 per card thousand, the 82.8% saturation, the shedding rates has been exclusively focused on HSV-2, genital herpes.
That is correct. All of our baseline models so far have assumed a genital-to-genital transmission route.
But the source material throws a massive, reality-altering plot twist into this entire mathematical model when it introduces a different virus and a different sex act.
Yes, it does.
What happens when we introduce oral sex into this equation? This brings us to the oral HSV-1 curveball, and why playing it safe is statistically the riskiest thing you can do.
This is perhaps the most counterintuitive, jarring finding in all of modern sexual health data. To understand it, we have to clearly define the viruses. We have been discussing HSV-2, which historically and biologically prefers the sacral ganglion at the base of the spine and therefore manifests on the genitals.
Okay.
Now we introduce HSV-1.
HSV-1 is the virus that traditionally causes cold sores or fever blisters on the mouth and lips. It lives in the trigeminal ganglion up near the ear, right?
Yes, historically it has been an oral infection, but the clinical data presented in our sources indicates a massive generational shift in how this virus behaves.
A shift.
HSV-1 is no longer just a cold sore virus. It is now a leading cause of first-time genital herpes infections in young adults across the developed world.
Meaning you literally get a cold sore virus on your genitals. How is that biological jump happening?
It happens almost exclusively through oral sex. If a partner who carries oral HSV-1 performs oral sex on a male, the virus sheds from the mouth and lips, comes into direct contact with the genital tissue, and he easily establishes a new home in the sacral ganglion.
Okay, I understand the mechanics of the transfer, but culturally, a lot of guys think, hey, it's just a cold sore, my aunt gets them, half the kids in my elementary school had them, it's not a big deal.
Right, they dismiss it.
Yeah, they think it's definitely not as scary as real genital herpes. Why does introducing this childhood virus change the mathematical risk so drastically for a client?
It changes the math because of the biological shedding rates. We spent a lot of time discussing asymptomatic shedding earlier, the virus being microscopically active on the skin without visible sores.
Yeah, the invisible shedding.
Let's compare the shedding behavior of the two viruses. For genital HSV-2, clinical studies show that asymptomatic shedding occurs on roughly 10% to 20% of days.
Okay, so maybe 1 out of every 5 days, the virus is secretly active on the genitals.
Now look at oral HSV-1. Clinical studies show that oral HSV-1 sheds asymptomatically from the mouth and lips on 25% to 37% of days.
Wait, let me make sure I'm hearing that right. Up to 37% of days?
Yes.
That is roughly double the shedding rate of genital HSV-2.
It is statistically far more contagious in a casual daily setting because the mucosal tissue of the mouth sheds the virus constantly and efficiently.
Wow.
Now, combine that incredibly high shedding rate with the fact that oral HSV-1 is ubiquitous. Up to 64% of the global population carries it, mostly acquired during childhood, and you have a statistical giant hiding in plain sight.
Let's look at the Python mathematical models provided in the sources, because the creator of these scripts adjusted the baseline risk to account for this massive difference in shedding behavior. And the numbers the model generates are truly mind-blowing.
Let's break down the per-act probabilities of simulation outputs.
When I ran these numbers through the model, the result forced me to rethink everything I thought I knew about sexual risk. Because of this double shedding rate, the per-act risk of oral to genital transmission, meaning a male receiving unprotected oral sex from a partner who has oral HSV-1, is calculated at 0.96%.
Almost a full 1% risk for every single encounter.
And if the client decides to use a condom for oral sex, the protected risk drops to 0.34%. Now, let's put those numbers right next to what we established for genital HSV-2.
Okay.
Unprotected vaginal sex with an HSV-2 positive partner was 1.7 per 1,000, which is 0.17%.
The contrast is stark.
It's beyond stark. It's a complete inversion of logic. 0.96% for unprotected oral, 0.17% for unprotected vaginal. If a guy thinks he is playing it safe, if he thinks he is being responsible by avoiding intercourse entirely and only receiving oral sex from an escort who just gets the occasional cold sore on her lip,
Yeah.
he is actually subjecting himself to a per-act risk that is more than 5 times higher than having unprotected vaginal intercourse with a woman who is confirmed medical-grade genital HSV-2.
That is precisely what the mathematical models suggest. The biological reality of oral shedding rates, combined with the lack of anatomical barriers, completely flips our human intuition upside down.
And it gets worse when you factor in human behavior.
Hmm.
Because let's be honest about the realities of the industry. How many male clients actually use a condom to receive oral sex?
It's exceedingly rare,
The vast majority of oral encounters are unprotected.
which means that the 0.96% unprotected risk rate is the functional, everyday reality for most of these encounters. To truly understand the gravity of that near 1% risk, the Python model zooms out and looks at the impact from the perspective of the escort's annual volume.
Yes, the model runs a simulation based on volume.
Look,
Let's look at those numbers. Let's assume we have an escort who